"Dad, I have a surprise for you," she whispered, handing me an envelope I thought held a Christmas card. But inside wasn't joy. It was $1 million debt with my name forged on the line. In that moment, love turned into betrayal, and my life collapsed with the weight of a single signature. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I am Thomas Tom Hale, 65, retired after decades turning wrenches for the railroad. The rhythm of locomotives still lives in my hands. Torquey, grease, the way a good engine settles like a hound in warm straw. Since the divorce 20 years ago, I have kept two simple systems. Tightened bolts, labeled folders, early mornings, early nights. A man can weather most storms if he keeps the basics oiled and the boundaries clear. My house sits on a shoulder of hill outside Asheville, a cedar-sided place with a steep drive and a view down to the French Broad. Winter comes early in these mountains. Wind threads the pines and finds the seams in a man's coat. Inside, the lamp over the table throws a soft amber. The floorboards creak in friendly ways as if the house remembers every footstep and agrees to carry the weight a while longer. Money for me is a thing to respect, not worship. I live on pension checks, a modest 401k, and the satisfaction of a mortgage nearly paid. Receipts and records go into a steel safe you can hear shut. Deed, insurance, tax folders, a ring of labeled keys. There is comfort in paper that sits still. My father's pocket watch rests on top, heavy as a promise. I wear the safe's key on a leather thong because the day you stop tracking your assets is the day your life begins to fray. Most weeks look a lot alike. I maintain the old pickup, teach the neighbor boys how to pin a bearing without chewing it, mend a leaky faucet at the church, and fish when the weather allows. On Saturdays, I unlock the shed out back where I keep a bench grinder and a pair of battered vices. Teenagers show up with bicycles, weed whackers, the occasional mower. I make them write down torque values before they touch a ratchet. Family these days is mostly a photograph. My ex, Diane, remarried the idea of motion and never sat long in one place. Our daughter, Lily, lives in Austin, managing communications for a wellness startup. She talks about campaigns and reach and impressions. Her husband, Connor, is the entrepreneurial type who gives a firm handshake and says, "Let's circle back." Our calls are polite and brief. Still, I am a father. The hinge in me that swings toward Lily never rusted. I keep a shoebox of her life on the closet shelf, the first library card, a paper turkey traced from her hand, a photo from the day she drove away to college. Hope is a habit, and I practice it. When she said they would come for Christmas, I read the message twice and stood a little taller the rest of the week. December sharpened. I strung lights along the porch rail, wound garland over the mantel, and set the tree with wedges like shimming a bearing. I polished my mother's silver and pressed cloth napkins under a dictionary. In the kitchen, I grated nutmeg for a pie from my mother's recipe, the one that makes the house smell like apples and patience. In the spare room, I turned down the quilt, set a glass on the nightstand, and tucked a note under the pillow. Welcome home. Some things in the house hold more weight than they look. The safe's key prints a small oval on my chest. My father's watch still ticks when I wind it. On the hallway table, next to a bowl of screws and matchbooks, sits the framed picture of Lily on graduation day. When I pass it, I feel the same old mixture of pride and worry. Pride for what she built, worry for what the world wants to take. Connor's talk sometimes rides high in the clouds. Fundraising, burn rate, bridge rounds, phrases that float. I know steel and gaskets. They know networks and growth. I was determined that no suspicion would hitch a ride into Christmas. Late afternoon on Christmas Eve, the wind rose, and the pines at the edge of the yard made the same voice they made when I was a boy. I checked the thermostat, turned the porch light on, and set the pie to cool. The house answered with small, agreeable sounds. Wood settling, the heater kicking on. Twilight gathered like blue smoke beyond the porch. I heard them before I saw them, the crunch of tires on cold gravel. Headlights swung across the window. In the entryway, I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door to the kind of cold that makes your breath seem honest. The car idled. My heart did the steady, decent thing it has learned to do. Kept time, even when the tune changed. "Dad," Lily said, and I felt the word land and hold. I stepped aside to let the warm house gather them in. Somewhere a draft found the hem of my coat. It felt like the smallest warning and the oldest blessing, both at once, and I chose, for that moment, only the blessing. The pie cooled, the lights hummed, and the door closed gently on the dark like a hand closing over water. The kitchen carried the kind of warmth you can't fake. Heat from the oven, cinnamon in the air, silver catching candlelight and throwing it back in soft ripples. I'd polished those spoons until my knuckles ached. Now they lay obedient beside the plates. Lily shrugged off her coat and smoothed her hair like she used to before school pictures. Connor filled the room quickly, his voice bright, coat folded just so on the chair. I moved slow on purpose, carving the roast, checking the pie, keeping my hands busy the way a man does when he wants a good evening to stay put. We ate as the wind needled the window panes. Connor narrated the shape of his world in tidy bullet points. He said bridge round, runway, customer acquisition, and the words hovered like vapor over hot soup. Lily smiled when prompted, but her fingers left small, damp crescents on the water glass. I nodded when it fit, asked questions any decent host would ask, and tried to listen past the pitches for the note underneath. In Lily's voice I heard fatigue, in Connor's cadence the energy of a man sprinting downhill. To steady us, I steered the conversation to lower gears. I pointed at the photograph on the shelf, the one of Lily holding a cardboard mortarboard at kindergarten graduation, and told the story of how she'd insisted on sleeping with the tassel. I passed the basket of rolls and ladled gravy with a flourish my mother would have laughed at. The tree blinked in the living room, and the old clock above the stove cleared its throat every 15 minutes. "Your mother's silver still shines up right," I said, and let memory do some light lifting. Lily's shoulders eased. Connor even laughed when I imitated the station master who used to bark schedules like a drill sergeant. After the plates were stacked and the sink hissed, Lily dried her hands on a towel and reached into her bag. She brought out a red envelope, the expensive kind with weight to it, and set it on the table as if placing a bird that might spook. "A surprise before presents," she said. Hope stepped out from behind my ribs. Plane tickets, a photograph from an ultrasound, some tender ordinary thing you can tuck in a Bible and keep. Connor's smile held and didn't, the way a belt looks intact just before the fray gives way. I opened the flap and felt the paper. Not glossy, not festive. The first page was a delinquency notice, the sort of letter that bends even crisp paper into a frown. Behind it came statements, demand letters, a tidy table of dates missed and penalties applied. A term sheet with merchant cash advance typed like a diagnosis. Near the back, a summary page, the number printed with the confidence of a stamp, $1 million, principal braided with fees and costs until the rope thickened. Air thinned in the room, though the heater hummed the same as before. I did not rush to a verdict. There is a tone men take when they're about to accuse, and I kept mine in the holster. I slid a document free. A photocopied guarantee naming Connor, initialed like a man signing for a rental car he expects to return on time. Then another page, a co-guarantor addendum. My name rode the line like a familiar train on the wrong track. The signature looked like mine had been taught to misbehave by a stranger. The notary seal bit the paper with official teeth. I let the page rest and allowed the room to come back into focus. Pie cooling, pine sap sweet in the air, the clock lifting its hands another notch. Connor shifted to the seat of persuasion. He spoke of payrolls and an acquisition within reach, of saving dozens of jobs, of how a short-term rescue would keep the company on glide path to a clean exit. Lily placed her palm flat on the envelope as if she could keep everything inside from spilling. "Dad, you'll understand," she said, voice wobbling but gentle, the way a glass vibrates on a train table right before the track smooths. "Family helps family." I heard my own sayings reflected back at me like light from a window across the street, recognizable, distant. I steadied my breath and let the engine in me idle. "I need to read every page," I said, not yet looking up. I asked for maturities and collateral, liens and filings, the age of the oldest default. I underlined a clause that sounded too friendly and circled a date that seemed to lean forward with its hand out. When I didn't have a pen, I used the square edge of a butter knife to crease the corners of places I'd revisit in the morning. Pressure announced itself in tidy phrases. "Creditors are counting days," Connor said. "A commitment this week keeps everything intact." Lily, trying for pragmatic, said they were 2 cycles behind and then went silent, as if the number itself had slipped. I pulled my father's pocket watch and checked time I didn't intend to spend tonight. The face glowed the same soft pearl it had on every Christmas I could remember. A man can set his course by a few simple instruments: pulse, breath, time. I closed the envelope and squared it with the edge of the table. The pie had sunk a touch in the center, as if even it recognized a change in pressure. "I'll review it all in the morning," I said. There was no thunder in my voice, only the weathered tone of a mechanic who knows when to stop wrenching for the night. Lily nodded too fast, relief and fear braided together. Connor looked as if he wanted to argue with gravity but thought better of it. Wind worked the gutters outside and the porch light flickered just once. I stacked the dishes to finish later and set the envelope aside as you might set aside a tool that is sharp and necessary. The house breathed. Christmas lights winked from the tree with a patience that felt older than any bill. Somewhere inside me a thin keening began, the sound an engine makes before a bearing fails, nearly inaudible unless you've spent years with your ear to the casing. I stood, thanked them for the evening we still had, and poured us each tea. Tomorrow I would open the safe, the files, the questions. Tonight I would keep the room warm and the lines of the night clean, because a man facing a storm should sleep with his boots by the door. I woke before the sun and let the cold in on purpose. Mountain air can sand down panic to a workable edge. Coffee went on, black and clean, and I cleared the kitchen table like a bench before a teardown. The red envelope sat where I'd left it. I set out what I trust: a spiral notebook, a carpenter's pencil, my reading glasses, a ruler for bracketing clauses like shims under an uneven foot, and the old pocket watch to remind me that time, not fear, is the real boss. I opened the stack and read like a mechanic listens, patiently with the whole machine in mind. The first set were straightforward delinquencies, then merchant cash advances, fast money that bites hard. Percentages disguised as fees, daily remittances, confessions of judgment waiting like a sprung trap. A balloon schedule sat at the bottom of a page like a dare. I mapped dates into the notebook, underlined names of counterparties, and boxed a row of account numbers that didn't repeat. A UCC1 filing showed up with collateral described as "all assets now owned or hereafter acquired." I wrote the phrase twice, slower the second time. I slid a page under the lamplight. The co-guarantor addendum carried my name in block letters and a signature that tried to be mine. It had my slant, but not my pressure. My loop on the H never closes, and here it was, pinched tight. The spacing drifted like someone copying without breath. The notary stamp overlapped the descender, sloppy or hurried. The date ran close to Lily's birthday, a detail that made my stomach tighten in a way no interest rate ever had. I took photographs with my phone, filed them into a passworded folder, and wrote a line to myself. Don't decide angry. Decide exact. By 7, I had seen enough to know I needed a second set of eyes. I called Raymond, who used to wear a county seal on his jacket and now wears a denim shirt with the same authority. I kept my words lean. "I've got papers." "I need you." He said he'd be there by 9 and hung up like a man who still trusts the phone to be a tool, not a leash. While I waited, I called the branch I've used since checks were paper. The teller who knows my name passed me to a supervisor who lowered her voice so far I could barely hear it over the hum of the fridge. She said my accounts had been flagged for asset verification requests from third parties. I asked whether any liens had been filed. She hesitated, then she read a line from her screen about a home equity line established 3 years ago. The name on the application was Diane's. There was a power of attorney scanned into the record, bearing my typed name and a signature with my tilt, but not my tempo. Disbursements matched transfers to an entity connected to Connor in the early days of his venture. I wrote each word as if I were tightening head bolts in sequence. The pencil left a dark groove. Through power of attorney, I asked for copies of the entire file, the verification log, and the notary record. The supervisor said policy required a formal request. I told her I'd send counsel. After we ended the call, I stood very still. I have known hard surprises. A derailment, a diagnosis, a marriage cooling like slag. This was different. This was the polite burglary of identity conducted under fluorescent light. Raymond pulled up at 9:15 with a thermos and a toolbox that didn't hold tools. He read in silence for a long time, then set the pages back in careful order, like placing parts on a clean blanket so nothing small goes missing. He used a jeweler's loop on the notary stamp in the signatures. He compared them to my driver's license and an old tax return pulled from the safe. "You're right," he said at last. "Line weight is off. Spacing is wrong. This isn't your hand." And the notary's seal cuts a loop it shouldn't touch. He tapped the date with his pen. "Close to your girl's birthday." Somebody thought that was clever. I showed him the notes from the bank. He whistled without sound, which is how he swears. He listed the words no one wants attached to their life: forgery, identity theft, notary irregularities, fraudulent inducement. Then he said the ones that make a man feel less helpless: report, hold, standstill. He advised I commit to nothing, not one sentence, without a paper trail that began with our side. He started a list: demand for notary journal, IP address logs if the bank used any remote authorization, recorded call requests, a copy of the power of attorney with its witnessing information. An email chimed from an address that sounded like a collection agency named itself after a mountain: Atlas Capital Recovery. 15 days to reach a consensual resolution, the letter said, or they would prioritize soft repossession efforts, including but not limited to actions against available real property. The phrase had the pseudo-politeness of a stranger calling you by your first name before stealing your coat. A text from Connor arrived on its heels, urging a quick sign of good faith to calm the sharks. I flipped the phone face down and moved it a foot away. A boundary, however small, is a start. Raymond drafted a short, tight packet. First, a police report to the county attorney detailing suspected identity theft related to the EHELOC and the guarantee with exhibits. Second, a letter to Atlas asserting dispute of liability, putting them on notice of potential fraud and demanding a 45-day standstill while authenticity was examined. Third, a demand to the bank for the complete power of attorney file, notary journal entries, and personnel who touched the application. He slid the papers toward me, and I signed where he pointed, with my hand slow and deliberate, thinking about how a signature is a kind of oath in ink. By afternoon, the house had the hollow quiet of a shop after lunch. Tools at rest, air holding its breath. I placed the red envelope and my notes in the safe, turned the key, and felt the mechanism catch. I walked the perimeter of the yard because movement outruns dread. The wind gnawed at the pines and brought me a smell of distant chimney smoke, the clean, good kind that means someone is making soup and not everything has been replaced by plastic. Back inside, I wrote 3 rules on an index card and taped it inside the cabinet where I keep the mugs. No money into the hole, no promises without counsel, no feelings over facts. I brewed tea and sat with the pocket watch open, its second hand ticking past what a younger man would have called the time to lose his temper. Then I drafted a message to Lily for the morning. We needed to meet, just the two of us, with every page on the table and a plan that required truth first and dollars later. I deleted 3 softer versions and kept the clean one. A man can fix a lot if he starts with what's bent instead of pretending the noise is nothing. Outside, the ridge darkened. I set my boots by the door. The storm was here, but so was I. I chose a quiet coffee shop across from the brick church where the hiss of milk and the rattle of cups give cover to hard talk. I arrived early with a file folder, my notebook, and an index card with 3 rules. No money into the hole, no promises without counsel, no feelings over facts. Outside, frost held the grass like a polite warning. I needed clarity more than comfort. Lily came before the hour, moving like a traveler who had carried her pack too far. Her hair was pulled back, eyes rimmed by a sleepless shine, shoulders squared past comfort. I ordered tea. She wrapped both hands around the cup. The red envelope sat on the folder, visible, unthreatening, a reminder that we were here to face a real thing, not its shadow. I laid out the plan the way a mechanic explains a lockout. We would fund legal and forensic costs first, never debt. Freeze discretionary spending, require 2 signatures for any transfer above a low cap, and hire an independent review to tear through books and bank lines. Enforce the 45-day standstill already noticed to Atlas, then hold short, documented meetings with each counterparty. Goals were simple: protect the house and name, buy time for truth. Governance came with mercy. For 90 days, I wanted limited control over finance decisions, enough to halt fancy and insist on receipts. Connor's equity would sit in escrow. Every payment would carry 2 signatures, mine or a forensic officer's, paired with hers. It was a relief valve on a boiler. The pressure might stay, but the explosion would not. "I'll sign the controls and step back," she said. Guilt and gratitude crossed her face like weather. She agreed to open the books and sign the dual control policy. She would request a leave to avoid conflicts. She asked me not to involve her mother yet, worried one more blow would topple what remained of Diane's steadiness. "Please give me time to talk to Mom," she said. I said the feelings were real and would be respected, but the law would move anyway. Facts first, then dollars. Connor joined by speakerphone, wind noise swishing around his words. He argued a forensic would spook investors and kill any bridge. Investors read panic. A forensic screams panic. He pressed for a gesture of good faith, something quick, even a letter. A brief letter buys us breathing room. "No commitments beyond the standstill until data lands," I said. "We're done paying guesses." He pushed a few more angles, then signed off with a farewell like a door closing in the next room. I told Lily what the bank had revealed. A home equity line opened 3 years ago in Diane's name, using a power of attorney that imitated my hand without my pressure. Disbursements moved to an entity tied to Connor's early funding. I said the facts without accusation. They were heavy enough. She went still, as if her spine had to renegotiate with gravity. She asked for time to speak to her mother before the report became public. I agreed to the courtesy and kept the county process moving. We signed a brief memorandum, dual signatures, escrow, temporary control, open books, leave of absence. I slid the pen across the table like passing a wrench to an apprentice who has finally stopped stripping threads. When we stood, we hugged again, smaller but truer, the way people hug at a graveside when nothing is being fixed, but something is being honored. On the way home, I stopped at the shed and put my hands on tools I trust. I sorted wrenches by size, wiped a bench already clean, and pulled the cover from the old Harley. I decided to sell it and move the money into a small apprenticeship fund with a real name and a bank account. A man can plan for a hard winter and still keep the porch swept. Atlas emailed while I tightened the vise I never leave loose. They wanted a meeting within the week and hinted at soft repossession priorities if we failed to attend. Connor texted urging a handwritten note to calm nerves. I forwarded both to Raymond and turned the phone face down. Words dropped in heat or tools slipped into engines. They do more harm than silence. That evening at the small group, I asked for prayer without details. Men nodded, recognizing a storm line. Back home, the house was quiet. Lily texted to say she would sign in the morning and thanked me with a careful honesty that made my chest ache. I answered with the time and place and left the rest unsaid. I printed a calendar for the review, taped it to the fridge, and filed the Atlas letter beside the standstill notice in the safe. Frost whitened the yard again, the kitchen light trembled once and steadied. I washed my cup, set my boots to dry, and went over the plan one last time. In the morning, we would drive to Charlotte and lay it on a table where the other side could try to break it. Plans rarely win fights. People keeping their heads do. The conference room in Charlotte felt like a refrigerated engine bay, paneled glass, polished table, a projector throwing ledgers onto a winter-colored wall. The HVAC held the air to an obedient hush. I took my seat with Lily to my left and Raymond to my right, the red envelope replaced by a neat stack of copies with tabs, a mechanic's order to a mess that did not want to be ordered. Across the table sat Atlas Capital Recovery, two men in trimmed suits and a woman with a tablet, plus their outside counsel, a younger attorney who smiled the way people do when they practice in mirrors. They began in the key they favor, urgency as virtue. The lawyer narrated slides at a commercial clip, merchant cash advances priced like small knives, default notices, the balloon schedule that swelled and then burst, email reminders time-stamped like station calls. A tidy column listed soft repossession vectors, which is how some people say your roof. Time is of the essence, he said. The sentence landed like a torque spec recited without context. Raymond let them finish. Then he clicked his pen once and laid our papers into the stream. First, his preliminary signature analysis, stroke weight, pen lift, character spacing. My H never closes. Theirs had cinched like a belt notched too far. The notary stamp clipped a loop it had no business touching. He set down a comparison sheet with my driver's license and a tax filing. He did not accuse, he measured. Next, he placed a letter to Atlas asserting dispute of liability and a request for a 45-day standstill while authenticity and authority were examined. On top, he laid a copy of our identity theft report to the county attorney, an exhibit list stapled like a parts manifest. I added plain words in the voice I use when telling a junior not to strip threads. We were not denying debts existed on the corporate side. We were denying my personal liability on the basis of forged execution and a suspect power of attorney tied to a home equity line I neither sought nor authorized. Any good faith would be truth, not checks. Lily held her hands together as if they were trying to leave the table. Connor sat forward, then back, then forward again, his phone face down, as though tempted and punished in alternating beats. The lead recovery agent watched the notary discussion with an interest that belonged to self-preservation. The young lawyer's smile became a plan. He spoke about process, about their reputable partners, and reached for a folder with copies of the notarized pages as if the stamp could close the question by being visible. Raymond slid his phone forward and pressed play. The room filled with the narrow sound of a recorded call. A notary admitting she had not met the signer in person. Someone well-known had vouched, so she stamped, which is like saying a wheel looked round enough at a distance. The agent's pen stopped moving. The attorney's jaw settled half an inch. In the space that opened, you could feel a new calculation take its first breath. I watched Lily. The truth was heavier than anything I could lift for her. She spoke softly, but with the clean edge of a tool used correctly. She said her mother had urged a shortcut, that it was supposed to be a temporary borrowing of a name. She said that was wrong and that she would open every book, sign dual controls, and step down while the work was done. I kept my eyes on the table so she could borrow my steadiness without borrowing my gaze. Then came the piece no one rehearses. The attorney, looking for a path that didn't lead directly to sanction, identified who had vouched for the signature. He said a name I knew too well, the younger sister of the woman I'd been seeing. It took a second for the meaning to fully seat. The room did not move. The HVAC kept humming. I saw a season of evenings, porch light, easy talk, suddenly threaded through this cold procedure. There is a click a man hears when the personal locks into the legal. It is not loud, but it is permanent. I chose the lever I could stand under. Please record the conflict, I said. We proceed on the facts. The attorney nodded as if something in him appreciated a clean line. The agent asked for a recess to review internally. Raymond handed him our standstill letter for the file, and we sat in the silver pause that follows a dropped wrench when everyone waits to see whether it broke anything on the way down. They returned with faces adjusted to the weather. The agent said Atlas would accept a 45-day standstill contingent on transparent disclosures and a calendar for data access. The attorney added conditions. Lily would sign an asset disclosure for the relevant period. Connor would accept a temporary suspension from operational control. Founder equity sufficient to cover a quantified portion of exposure would be placed in escrow. He used the phrase "without prejudice," their way of keeping doors open. Raymond amended in pen, crisp block letters that left no room for the fog of memory. I initialed where he pointed. Lily initialed with a steadiness I had not seen in months. Connor initialed last, the flourish smaller than his habit. We agreed that all communications would route through counsel and that no one would use the word commitment when they meant wish. When we stood to leave, the winter air in the lobby felt like a machine shop after the power is cut. Cold, honest, free of hum. Outside, Charlotte's buildings held the sky in tidy rectangles. I felt older and also exactly the age I was. A man can carry less than he thought and more than he feared at the same time. Lily walked beside me without speaking, which was the best kind of speech. Raymond checked his watch and said we would draft the follow-up before dinner. By the curb, I let myself register the loss I had just purchased with principal. A quiet relationship likely ending under fluorescent light because a stamp had been loaned where it never belonged. There are prices attached to boundaries. I felt one settle into my coat. Still, the plan was intact. We had bought time with facts instead of dollars, placed a wedge under the rolling weight, and named what needed naming. The next step would be the hardest kind of conversation, the one where history asks to be trusted and law insists on a receipt. I breathed once, deep enough to taste metal, and put my hand on the door. Engines live or die by how you handle heat. So do families. The drive back from Charlotte felt like cooling a hard-run engine. The city thinned to bare trees and billboards. The mountains rose, patient as anvils. I took inventory the way I do after a repair. What we tightened, what still rattled, what we broke to save what mattered. We had bought time with facts, and a standstill taped now to the inside of my skull. Cost was counted too. A quiet relationship would likely end in fluorescent light because a stamp went where it shouldn't. Back home, I printed the standstill and taped it to the refrigerator. Under it, I wrote 3 lines in block letters. Facts first, receipts or nothing, boundaries stay. I called and set a meeting with Diane for the next afternoon at a diner off the highway, the kind that keeps neon on during daylight. I arrived early and placed my tools on the table. Copies of the HELOC file, the suspect power of attorney, my notes from the bank, Raymond's list of requests. They lay there like seized parts, each telling a failure in a different voice. When Diane came in, she looked like someone who had practiced composure in a car mirror. At first, her explanation came polished. She said it was a temporary fix to help Lily, that banks allowed introductions, that everyone expected the company to pop and repay before anyone was the wiser. When I didn't answer, her tone edged toward indignation about how business is done now. I let the server pour the thin coffee and waited. The gear slipped. Pleading showed through the paint. "Don't file anything," she whispered. "If this gets out, our daughter's name is ruined." The word "our" reached for a pass that no longer had legal force. I slid a single sheet across the table, the civil proposal Raymond drafted. It required the lake cottage she'd purchased to be listed and sold, with proceeds wired against the HELOC. It required a sworn declaration detailing the authorization path, every person who touched the papers, and cooperation with the county attorney. It barred her from signing, sponsoring, or facilitating credit instruments or powers of attorney on behalf of others for 5 years. The language was dry and careful. It tasted like metal. I recited the terms the way I would read torque specs to a trainee, slowly, once. She tried the old photos next: wedding day, Lily's first breath. The afternoon I painted a nursery yellow. The past is quicksilver. It shines and it slips. "Memories aren't receipts," I said quietly. She flinched at the word. She asked if I was punishing her. I told her punishment wasn't mine to give. Consequences were already in motion. What I offered was the cleanest route through. Later, in my kitchen, with the standstill staring back at me, I told Lily what had been put to her mother. She listened with both hands wrapped around a mug. Guilt moved across her face but didn't bury it. She said she would sign the controls, take a leave, open the books, and tell her mother to cooperate. Pride is a dangerous tool, but in the right hands, it helps a person stand up. She stood. An hour after she left, the temporary board sent an email confirming Connor's suspension from operations and the placement of a block of founder equity in escrow. The dual signature policy was live. Expenses above a modest cap would require approval with documentation. In the silence that followed, I could hear what wasn't being said. Connor had moved from argument to calculation. Sometimes the quiet is a man counting exits. There was one more call to make. I dialed the woman I had been seeing and told her what the attorney had placed in the record, that her younger sister had vouched for a signature never made in person. The call was short, careful, almost formal. I said, "I have to do the right thing, even if it costs us." She exhaled and said, "I know." We paused long enough to hear the line as a line and not a rope. We wished each other health. Some endings take the dignity you give them. I tried to give enough. I drove to the county complex and signed a witness statement in a room that smelled like toner and winter coats. The clerk stapled copies and gave me a receipt. Receipts matter, they outlast moods. Raymond texted the forensic calendar, data pulls, interviews, notary journal requests, bank logs. The list looked like a month of hard weather. I set alarms the old-fashioned way. A paper calendar on the fridge, every square penciled with a step. That night, I went to the shed and rolled the Harley into the light. I wiped dust with an old t-shirt and took one last ride up the hill and back, just enough to feel the engine say what engines always say when they're made right. I will hold. In the morning, I called a buyer I trusted and moved the money into an account under a new name, the Hale Apprenticeship Fund. It was not penance. It was a hedge against whatever the storm took, a way to tell the world I still believed in hands learning honest work. Atlas sent 2 emails pressing for dates. I forwarded both to Raymond and went outside to clear the walk. The cold bit clean. In the distance, the mountains held their posture, indifferent to human paperwork. Back inside, I organized files until the edges lined up and the tabs read left to right like a sentence. I sharpened a pencil and wrote the next 7 tasks on an index card. Work, even small, keeps fear from expanding to fill all available volume. After dinner, the house breathed in its old rhythm. The standstill paper made a soft whisper each time I opened the fridge, a small reminder that time, for once, was working for us. My phone buzzed with a court notice about preliminary scheduling. I set it under a magnet and stood a long minute with the pocket watch open in my palm. The second hand ticked like a metronome inside the ribs. The choice had been made and paid for in the coin choices cost: sleep, company, ease. Outside, the ridge darkened. Inside, I set my boots by the door and my rules in reach. What comes next belongs to the sequence we started. Truth, then law, then whatever remains after heat and pressure do their work. The forensic report landed like a service bulletin stamped URGENT. I set it on the table, squared its corners, and read as if a bearing depended on it. The numbers that had felt puffed now revealed their scaffolding. Revenue recognized before contracts cleared, deferred entries that deferred the truth, wellness packages bundled with data usage clients never consented to, margins fattened by hope, then dressed in accounting cologne. I underlined recognized prematurely, boxed a list of internal emails labeled polish numbers, and wrote in the margin what I tell kids in the shop: polish is not repair. Atlas kept the standstill but cinched the strap. They wanted a day-by-day access calendar, secondary bank accounts, and working papers from third parties. Raymond filtered the requests like coolant through a clean screen. We acknowledged what fit the agreement and refused anything that reached beyond it. Every reply went from Lily to me to him and out under his letterhead. I didn't trust adjectives, I trusted timestamps. Pressure tightened around Connor. Subpoenas began to flower in his inbox like night blooms. Requests for devices, messages, wire logs. He tried a text that asked if we could talk offline like family. I forwarded it to Raymond and put the phone face down. When I was young, I thought adulthood meant learning new tools. Turns out it also means learning where not to put your hands. Diane kept her side of the civil line. The Lake Cottage listing hit the web with photos that made the water look like a promise. A week later, she wired the first payment toward the HELOC. The receipt printed with that old thermal fade, but I slid it into a sleeve anyway. She signed a sworn declaration spelling out the power of attorney shortcut and who stood where. I read it once and set it in the file. The knot in my chest loosened a notch, not enough to breathe easy, enough to breathe right. News travels in small towns along strange rails. A post on the neighborhood forum mentioned a situation without naming mine. Whispers in the church kitchen wore my outline. I answered with silence and work. It helped that Lily changed shape in daily ways. She stopped explaining, started doing, and brought a notebook to the shop where she logged torque specs beside grocery lists. At night, she wrote in a journal she didn't show me, then asked if she could help on Saturdays. I handed her a parts washer and said the only thing that mattered, keep what you clean in order. My doctor didn't love my blood pressure. He adjusted a dose and told me to keep walking and keep boundaries. I swept the shed until the floor showed its old scars. I sold the Harley and moved the money into the Hale Apprenticeship Fund with an account number that felt like a door I had built myself. The kids kept coming with crooked chains and idle screws, and when they left on time and with fingerprints clean, I remembered that usefulness is also a kind of medicine. Halfway through the standstill, the forensic team found what I had worried was there, and hoped was not. The company's algorithm, the only thing close to an engine with resale value, had been assigned to a Delaware entity with a name designed to disappear in a list. The transfer predated talk of bankruptcy by just enough to qualify as cunning. Paperwork linked the shell to a friend of a friend, then back to Connor in a loop tight enough to strangle recovery. Civil paths to money thinned to a thread. I wrote twist in the margin and circled it hard, not for drama, but so I would remember what changed. When you cannot pull dollars back, you pull law forward. Raymond drafted a petition for a constructive trust on any proceeds, licenses, or derivative value tied to the stolen IP. He added a notice to Atlas putting the transfer in their field of view. Atlas read the room. Fraudulent conveyance is the sort of phrase that makes even collectors check their footing, and their next letter softened around my roof. They would maintain the standstill and, pending the court's handling of the IP, step back from any approach that aimed at my house. I took the letter to the window and let the winter light pass through it. Paper is thin. It is also what holds. A reporter called from the local paper. She had heard enough to ask smart questions. I said I would talk on one condition: mention the route out, not just the wreck. We met at the public library. I spoke about direct notary meetings and refusing guarantees made under tiers, about routing family money talk through counsel, about receipts that outlast affection. She wrote neutrally, and the piece landed without gossip salt. A church acquaintance pressed my hand and said his sister had nearly signed for a nephew's short-term fix. The fund's mailbox got its first donation from a stranger's checkbook with a tidy signature that made me think of clean welds. Evenings, I returned to the report, to the calendar, to the spine of the plan. Atlas wanted another set of dates. Raymond sent them. The forensic team scheduled device imaging. Lily brought cables and patience. Connor's lawyer tried a narrow interpretation that would have starved our access. Raymond answered with case law like a machinist lays shims. I kept an index card beside the fridge, tallying days elapsed and tasks completed. The rhythm steadied me. Walk, read, reply, sweep, sleep. Atlas sent a formal letter. In light of the pending petition and potential criminal exposure around the IP, they were suspending any efforts to touch my home and would await the court's guidance. I read it twice, then filed it behind a tab labeled House Clear. The word clear did not mean finished. It meant air where there had been pressure, a headspace you could work in. That night, Lily and I climbed to the attic and made a new album because it's easier to hold pages than to hold years. We put photos in order. Lily with a paper crown, Lily backpacked for kindergarten, Lily tall under a cheap cap and a sky that looked like possibility. We didn't narrate the missing parts. We let the sequence do its job. When we were done, the album felt heavier than the paper warranted and lighter than the past had been. Downstairs, the kitchen clock kept its faithful beat. Tomorrow would be for solutions, filings, offers, and the kind of darning that holds underwear. Tonight was for putting things back where they belonged and for believing that neatness could be a small rehearsal for repair. The petition for a constructive trust looked like a wiring diagram: lines, arrows, dates, loops. Raymond laid it across my table with annexes showing how the intellectual property walked out the front door into a Delaware shell. He highlighted the transfers in yellow, then the emails in blue, then the signatures in red, so the sequence resembled a brake system diagram. My job was to read for errors the way I checked torque specs. Dates aligned, names repeated where they shouldn't. A pattern became a confession written in bookkeeping. I initialed each page, steady and slow. Atlas took the call with Raymond later that week. I sat at the end of the line, silent but listening. Their counsel tried to sound stern, but words bent under the weight of what we had filed. Fraudulent conveyance was on the table, and no collector likes to sit next to a prosecutor. They agreed to pull back any attempt on my house officially while they shifted their sights to Connor and the equity in escrow. Raymond ended the call by saying every concession must be in writing. I added one word aloud: signatures. The line went quiet long enough to mark that we had been heard. Forensics scheduled a gauntlet of tasks: device imaging, log extraction, interviews with staff who had already fled. Lily turned the spare room into a command post. She taped a hand-drawn Gantt chart to the wall, color-coded tasks, and pinned a calendar where each square had a single word: image, logs, interview. I checked outlets, moved in a surge protector, and set up a locked cabinet. Life took on the cadence of a shift schedule. We punched in with coffee, punched out with exhaustion, and the machines in between were laptops instead of lathes. Raymond drafted a term sheet for settlement. The language was clean. Atlas acknowledges dispute of personal liability. In return, I provide cooperation with data recovery aimed at Connor and his partners. Permanent carve-out for the house, progress updates on a fixed timetable, remedies if Atlas strayed. I read the sheet like a spec manual, circling any word that didn't earn its place. Raymond trimmed until only load-bearing terms remained. Brevity is strength in metal and in law. Meanwhile, we pressed the banks. Requests went out for notary journals, personnel rosters, call recordings. A separate notice went to the state office that oversees notaries, describing irregularities without pointing fingers. I wrote in my notes, process, not people. If the process is weak, people fall through it. Fix the process, and fewer fall. Outside the legal trench, I built something that breathed clean air. The Hale Apprenticeship Fund became official with bylaws, a board of 3, and its own account. I met with the local community college and signed a memorandum to sponsor 2 basic mechanics classes. We shook hands in a workshop that smelled of coolant and chalk dust. Lily, still carrying the weight of her part in this mess, enrolled in a nonprofit accounting certificate and began working unpaid hours for the fund. It was penance shaped as service. I let her ledger the small donations that came in, correcting her numbers with patience, because correction is what keeps a machine alive. I kept house the way a man keeps a shop. I replaced the furnace filter, checked shingles on the roof, organized the kitchen drawers. On the fridge, I taped a note: slow is smooth, smooth is safe. It was a phrase I'd used with apprentices when they wanted to rush torque and snap bolts. My blood pressure readout settled closer to reasonable. Work made room for air. Atlas came back in writing. They agreed to the term sheet with minor edits. Progress reports at each 30-day mark, no explicit admission of fault. Raymond paired their language, inserted a dispute resolution clause, and highlighted the permanent house carve-out. I signed once all signatures lined up like bolts in a row. Relief didn't feel like triumph. It felt like a gearbox finally finding neutral. Reporters sniffed around. Lily and I agreed on a message: talk about rules, not about names. I said yes to one interview on the record, stressing safeguards for older adults. Never sign guarantees on emotion, always require direct notary meetings, always put counsel between family and debt. The article came out without drama, and the fund's inbox filled with quiet thank yous. I kept them in a folder labeled AIR because that is what they gave us. The court stamped our constructive trust petition and set a hearing date. Atlas countersigned the settlement memorandum with the carve-out in bold type. That evening, I shut down the laptops in the spare room, clicked off the power strip, and locked the cabinet. In the shed, I swept until the floorboards shone and the dustpan held the week's debris. The furnace hummed steady. Papers filed, terms signed, house shielded. Tomorrow would bring judgments and sentences, but tonight I allowed myself a moment of stillness. The kind that comes when an engine, after long work, finally idles smooth. The courthouse smelled like dust and winter coats, a blend I will always associate with decisions that outlive moods. We filed into a room paneled in the idea of authority. Raymond arranged our folders as if the alignment itself could keep chaos in its lane. I watched the second hand on the wall clock complete a circuit and understood that a different kind of clock had just begun. The judge had a voice that did not need volume. She read the petition and the record the way a machinist reads a dial. The findings landed in measured order. The constructive trust was granted. Anything earned by the algorithm or its offspring would carry a lien in the public air, money escorted by law wherever it tried to travel. The Delaware Shell's accounts were frozen pending distribution. You could feel the room's pressure change the way you feel a compressor ease off after a system finally seats. Connor stood when told. The sentence was short jail time, then probation with reporting, restitution tethered to the trust, and a condition that bound him to cooperate under penalty of waking the sentence back up. He looked smaller than his suits had ever let him be. Diane, who had cooperated early and fully, received a suspended sentence with supervision, a prohibition on serving as anyone's agent or signatory for 5 years, and mandatory financial literacy work that I hope is better than the handouts most clinics give. The order also recited, in lines I could have framed, that my house was carved out from collection permanently by the Atlas Agreement, and that no party was to cloud its title now or later. Atlas filed its own paper the same afternoon, formal and careful. They recognized in writing the lifetime carve-out on the property, redirected recovery to the escrowed founder equity and any value the trust captured, and thanked us in the language lawyers use when thanks is cheaper than another fight. I countersigned an acknowledgement that my cooperation obligations were complete barring scheduled updates. When I set the executed agreement beside the court's order, the two documents looked like a matched set of rails, finally parallel. Cleanup may be the least dramatic part, but it is the part that makes the rest mean something. Raymond closed the notary complaint by handing it off to the state office for whatever discipline they deem appropriate. He summarized the civil record with tabs for each decision and a cover page stamped Resolved/Continuing Oversight. I slid the binder into the safe and felt the latch catch with the right kind of weight. A tool cleaned and oiled, back on its hook. Out in the world, we adjusted our posture. Lily resigned from her company with a sentence that did not deflect blame. She finished the nonprofit accounting course and accepted what I had quietly hoped she would. Full charge of the Hale Apprenticeship Fund's books, under the eyes of an independent accountant who can sniff drift faster than I can. At a church workshop on family finance, she spoke for 5 minutes and said, "Truth first. Money only after truth." You could hear chairs creak as people sat forward to listen. The fund signed with the community college to sponsor 2 classes, Basic Mechanics and Intro to Electrical Systems. A small manufacturer donated shop stools with a logo stenciled on top. We printed a calendar and tacked it on the shop wall. A letter came from a young man who had changed oil in my driveway last spring and is now clocking in at a dealership. "Your class got me hired." My brother didn't take a payday loan. I placed the letter in a folder labeled AIR and let it freshen the room. A local article covered the court's rulings with commendable restraint. It explained what a constructive trust is and why notary meetings have to be in person. It quoted no names except those on the orders. The fund's mailbox filled with small checks, some folded inside stationery that smelled faintly of soap. I said no to stations that wanted sharper angles. It is possible to be accurate without being cruel. Life, which had been suspended between hearings and filings, lowered itself back onto its mounts. I met the woman I had been seeing for a slow walk by the river. We didn't take inventory or assign fault. We walked and the water spoke its old language against stones. At a bench we agreed on the dignity of rakes left clean and hung where they belong. "Let's go slow," she said, or "let's go separately, but kindly." I answered, "Kindly holds." It was almost all the dialogue we needed. The house quieted into itself. The folder marked House. Clear was replaced with the official release. I checked the roof, replaced a furnace filter, logged dates in the little book by the back door. A home is just a machine for holding lives together. It likes schedules. The invisible blade I had felt for months lifted from above the eaves. In the kitchen, I set the court order in a sleeve and slid it beside the deed, 2 sheets that say more than any speech. I wrote a letter to myself and folded it into a tab labeled Principles. Don't let kindness be a door you forget to close. Don't let fear be a lock you never open. Keep receipts, keep breath, keep pace. In the living room, I hung the Christmas stockings again, hers and mine. Between them, I pinned a single page on the mantel. Every expense above the cap requires documentation. Every power of attorney requires an in-person notary. It looked out of place in a room meant for soft light. Then, it didn't. On the porch that evening, the furnace cycled and held like a tuned engine at idle. The mountains kept their patient silhouette, indifferent and consoling at once. The sequence was complete. Law where it belonged, loss where it had to be, a path where we could walk without watching for traps. The story had 1 chapter left, and it was not about names anymore. It was about the shape of care when care grows up. After a long pull up a mountain grade, you don't slam a locomotive into rest. You idle, listen, and let the heat bleed off the metal you trust. Life after a year like mine needed the same discipline. The temptation was to declare victory, to celebrate the absence of alarms as proof of safety. But engines fail in the quiet too if you don't respect sequence. The truth is simple enough to fit on a shop rag. Order matters. Test before teardown. Measure before replacement. Tighten in a cross pattern. In living terms, I came to say it this way: truth first, process second, money last. Whenever I tried to reverse that order, I snapped a bolt I needed later. People talk about boundaries as if they were cruel things, walls meant to keep love from crossing. The older I get, the more I think boundaries are rails. They let good weight travel without tipping the train. A fence is a kindness because it tells both sides where the gate is. Love without boundaries is romantic debt, full of promissory notes written in the fog on a window. It borrows the future, then acts shocked at the bill. Love with boundaries carries responsibility in daylight. It thinks long about where to set the load down so nobody's buried when the weather turns. I used to file papers because I feared forgetting. I file them now because I respect remembering. Paperwork, done right, is a form of manners. Receipts outlast moods. Reconciling a bank statement is a decent little apology written in numbers. Here is what came, here is where it went, here is why. A notary stamp says 2 human beings looked each other in the eye and agreed on reality. Those little rituals are not cold. They are warm enough to trust. If a thing matters, give it a date, a signature, and a place to live. Saying no turned out to be a maintenance task, not a moral failing. Refusal done cleanly preserves the machine for future use. I learned a 3-step refusal that doesn't leak. Step 1, listen until the temperature drops. People in panic don't ask, they flood. You don't build a reply, you build a drain. Step 2, name only the facts you would sign your name to. Step 3, offer a path that runs through procedure instead of your wallet. That way you aren't a villain or a hero. You're a person who believes in torque specs. A good no is short, polite, and leaves the hinges oiled. It sounds like I can't do that. Here is what I can do next. I said those words once out loud in my empty kitchen just to hear them hold their own shape. No, facts first, process next, then we'll see about dollars. Money has 2 main jobs in a crisis. It can be an extinguisher or an oil can. The extinguisher is loud, messy, and necessary when something is actually on fire. But you can't cook with it, and it leaves a white dust on everything. The oil can is quiet, scheduled, and keeps the hole from seizing in the first place. I learned to spend extinguisher money on counsel and audits, people who keep you from attacking the wrong flame. I learned to spend oil can money on insurance, a small emergency fund, and a second opinion. The shine of a windfall goes away. The shine of a sound bearing lasts the life of the machine. There's a kind of courage that looks like softness from the outside. You slow down, you sleep before you sign. You let the adrenaline drain until the noise in your head doesn't make the decision for you. I started writing decisions on a card at night and reading them in the morning. If they still made sense to a cooler version of me, I kept them. If not, I threw them away and thanked whatever was sacred that I had not emailed anyone yet. Wait is a power word. It will not get applause. It will get you home. We are, each of us, a little archive. The trouble starts when we let other people maintain our catalogs. Hand your keys to anyone, literal keys, or the big kinds like signatures and passwords, and you've told the world to guess where you live. Meet a notary in person and meet them in the sun. Ask your bank for the log. Learn the names of the documents that protect you. And when a family member says, "Just trust me," let your answer ride on a simple phrase. Put that in writing. That sentence is not an accusation, it's a handrail. Justice and mercy can sit at the same table if you seek justice first. Justice is not vengeance. Justice is the moment you put a part back where it belongs and apply torque to spec. Mercy is the light you leave on. Mercy says change is possible. It does not loan out the breaker bar to people who keep stripping threads. In the hardest weeks, I held two images in mind: a bench with tools returned to their hooks and a porch light on. I tried to live between them. When I failed, I tried again the next day with quieter hands. I don't believe in closure as a finish line. Closures are what mechanics do to wounds so they can heal while you go back to useful work. Meaning came back to me by chores, not conclusions. I wiped counters until they made no sound under my hand. I sharpened pencils. I swept sawdust into small, honest piles. I taught a teenager how to seat a seal without nicking it. "Listen," I said, "you're not forcing it. You're inviting it home." He looked at the seal for a long time, then at me, and the second time he pressed it, it sat flush as a kind answer. Most of the big mistakes I've seen began with hurry and hid inside generosity. We confuse kindness with surrender. We call it support when what we mean is escape from discomfort. It feels noble for one long minute. Then the costs arrive from the future with interest. Better to be the person who funds prevention than the person who fuels recurrence. Pay for the class, not the party. Pay for the accountant, not the impression. Pay for the quiet structure that keeps chaos from having to be rescued. Communities, like machines, need a diagram they can share. We do each other a favor when we publish the safety rules and retire the gossip. I learned to say yes to the interview that taught people how to stand in a bank and ask for the notary's journal, and no to the one that wanted names spoken with a certain curl of the lip. Dignity scales better than drama. If a town is lucky, it becomes a common shop, tools returned to hooks, benches swept, lessons handed down without making anyone small. If you find yourself in such a place, bring your own broom, earn the air. Some repairs require a part you cannot afford and a blueprint you don't possess. Those are the days to ask two questions. What is the smallest true thing I can do now? What is the largest false thing I will refuse to do ever? The first gives you action. The second gives you spine. On paper, the smallest true thing can look ridiculous. Label a folder, ask for a receipt, write down a timeline. But small truths, stacked edge to edge, make a surface that holds weight. And refusing the big false thing, like signing what you did not read, saves years. If there is a sacrament I came to trust, it is the ritual of review. Once a quarter, I laid everything out: house, documents, passwords, habits. I crossed out what no longer earned its place. I wrote down what needed replacing. I scheduled the next look. Rituals are how you put muscle on promises. Tape your rules where your hand goes before your mind. Write a pledge in plain language and sign it. I will not guarantee a debt without counsel. I will not authorize in absence. I will read before I say yes, fold it once, and put it where you keep your wallet. When the time comes, let the folded paper be stronger than the folded feeling. There are voices that accuse caution of cowardice. They have never seen a shop after a bolt shears. You can lose fingers to a heroic hurry. What our days mostly need is the courage to be ordinary. Get the sleep, drink the water, tell the truth to one person who will not sell it. Keep the schedule that is boring on purpose. Do not confuse constant fire with a warm house. I hold one short line of dialogue in my pocket for when pressure arrives, dressed as love. No, let's do this right. It has saved me from generosity that would have harmed us both. It has also saved relationships because a person you refuse correctly can still meet you at the table when the smoke clears. If you must choose between being briefly misunderstood and permanently exploited, take the first and let time acquit you. There is a way to help that does not leave you empty. Give skill, not just funds. Show someone how to make a list, call a clerk, read a clause. Walk them through the sequence: truth, process, money. This is not stinginess, this is instruction. It is what you wanted when you were young and proud and thought your grip could substitute for a torque wrench. It could not then, and it cannot now. When I think about the path forward, I no longer imagine bright banners. I imagine a bench cleared at the end of the day. I imagine a calendar with one square checked off because the filter got changed on time. I imagine a door that locks, not because you distrust the world, but because you respect what was hard to build inside. I imagine the quiet proof that the machine will start after the frost, the first honest cough, the swing into a held idle, the way you know before you touch the throttle that it will carry you where you said you'd go. So here is what I can offer. If you've listened this far, look at your borders: home, wallet, heart. Ask which one is leaking, then ask which rule, written down and obeyed, would stop the drip. Let kindness ride shotgun, not drive. Let truth hold the map. Let process keep the tools dry. When your days settle into a steady rhythm, use that rhythm to lift others, not by carrying their load in secret, but by showing them where the handles are and how to lift with their legs. Someone will tell you this approach is unromantic. Smile and point to the engine that still runs after the hill in the winter and the long, mean stretch of bad weather. Romance that survives is the romance of reliability, the one that keeps its promises while carrying weight. It does not glitter, it arrives. It doesn't thrill, it holds. And when the next climb comes, as it always does, you will already know the order: truth first, process second, money last. You will already know the sound of your own life idling clean. And you will already have a hand free to steady whoever is beside you, not with speeches or rescue, but with the sturdy kindness of a person who learned, finally, to tighten to spec. Here's the closing section, distilled from Part 5's arc and written to stand on its own. Quiet, reflective, and universal, no names mentioned. Character count is included at the end. Endings rarely crash like thunder, most settle the way a well-tuned engine returns to idle. Steady, honest, and a little wiser for the heat it survived. After the noise, what remains isn't spectacle but sequence. Tell the truth, follow the process, and only then decide what the money should do. Boundaries stop affection from becoming leverage. Paperwork done with care turns memory into something you can lean on. Justice puts things back where they belong. Mercy leaves the porch light on. Neither has to shout when both are seated in the right order. In that light, repair looks ordinary. It's the calendar pinned to the fridge, the rule taped by the desk, the habit of reading before signing. It's saying no with a steady voice and a clear path forward. It's choosing reliability over drama, prevention over rescue, oil over extinguisher. And when a new hill shows up, as it always does, rhythm beats adrenaline every time. Slow becomes smooth. Smooth becomes safe. Safe makes room for kindness that lasts. If this story has a compass, it points toward durable care. Let truth hold the map. Let process keep the tools dry. Let kindness ride along without grabbing the wheel. Protect the home you're building, on paper, in practice, and in the quiet promises you keep with yourself. Then use that steady rhythm to lift others, not by carrying their secrets on your back, but by showing them where the handles are and how to lift with their legs. That's help that endures. Thank you for spending this time with us. We'd love to hear what stayed with you. Was it a line, a turn, a small rule that you might tape to your own fridge? Tell us in the comments, and if a moment hit home, drop the timestamp so others can find it too. Your reflections are the fuel that keeps this community running. If you haven't already, tap subscribe and turn on notifications. It lets you catch the next story the moment it idles into view. And share this episode with someone who could use a calm, practical map through a hard season. Wherever you're watching from, we're grateful you're here. May your days run steady, your boundaries hold, and your kindness last.